We shall come forward with something absolutely relevant in the contemporary scene right now. Soft power, which has been expanded in diverse forms by succeeding governments in India. The government of Narendra Modi at present has been creating innovative trends in the realm of Indian diplomacy by blending contemporary elements of soft power. The nation's potential of soft power, if implemented, certainly would enhance India's more exalted position in making it well-disposed and flourishing in the world, ladies and gentlemen. We would talk about India's soft power and advantage waiting to be harnessed with an absolutely brilliant panel again, beginning with Amish Tripathi, whom I am a big fan of. Amish is an Indian author known for his novels, the Shiva trilogy and the Ramchandra series. His unique combination of crackling storytelling, religious symbolism, and that dark, profound philosophy have turned him into almost an Indian publishing phenomenon, a cult in the world of readers. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome Amish Tripathi to Arth, a culture fest. We have with us Ashwin Sanghi, who ranks among India's highest-selling authors of English fiction. He's written several bestsellers like The Rosabelle Line, Chanakya's Chant, The Krishna Key, and many others. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Ashwin Sanghi. We have with us Anuraag Saxena, who's the founder of India Pride Project and Data Reveals. He's an activist, an advocacy expert, and commentator. He's been featured and published in BBC, The Washington Post, The Diplomat, Economic Times, The Times of India, and various international media. In conversation with these three public intellectuals and brilliant minds is Palki Sharma, who's the executive editor of WION, India's only international news channel. And she hosts a primetime news and views show called Gravitas that tracks and comments on all the big developments around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be coming up very, very soon with the next forum, India's Soft Power, an advantage waiting to be harnessed.
Good afternoon and welcome to all of you. Thank you, Arth, for having us here, and hello to my co-panelists, Ashwin Sanghi, Anuraag Saxena. Very good to be in conversation with you. I think Amish has also joined us. Are we waiting for him? Okay, so we'll start the discussion nonetheless, and this is one of my favorite subjects, India's soft power, an advantage waiting to be harnessed. Interestingly, the organizers have put a question mark at the end of this. I wouldn't. I would say we would all agree that there's a lot more to be done, but I will put that question to you guys nonetheless. Anurag, if we could begin with you, what do you mean when you say India's soft power? And do you think we are doing enough to harness it?
Well, I think, Palki, first of all, thanks to the organizers of Arth and to you. I think this is a really important session. Second, I honestly don't think I've heard a more loaded question than this. Look, I think we've been in an era of peace for almost 3/4 of a century now, largely speaking. Military and economic wealth as sources of power is a little passé. I do believe, and I like thinking small. I think it's really tough to think. I think it's really tough to think little and small. Every time you talk to cutting-edge people in the Silicon Valley, and you talk to celebrities in the West and all of that, there seems to be a yearn for something beyond, shoes and clothes and lattes and what have you. The last 2 years, if they've taught us anything, is that the world is at an inflection point where everybody's had a chance to sit down and reflect, right? Ideas like meditation and mindfulness and calmness which used to be a baby boomer thing, is now suddenly an Insta generation thing. So I think there is a lot of tacit, and might I say, ancient learnings that India has always offered to the world. Doesn't matter whether you package it as International Yoga Day or Bollywood or, a strategy to take textiles outside. I do think that the world is really ready, and all the more because of the pandemic, for India to say that, look, everybody seems to be searching for a higher level of consciousness. Everybody seems to be, the world at large is moving up the Maslow's need hierarchy, trajectory. And, the time is now for us to say that, look, we have anyway offered a lot to the world, which the world has begun to realize only very recently. We will also now appropriate credit for it. And I think that's something we've been terrible at. We've been terrible at managing the intellectual property around our spiritual exports, around our multiple exports. So I think it's time now for India to package our IP better and to claim its source better. To me, I think that's what the conversation is about.
I remember reading something by Martin and Anuraag. It was WhatsApp forward, so I can't be sure of the facts. But she said to have said that the biggest match is played here, in the 6-inch court. And while all the things that you mentioned about spirituality, about haldi latte and what have you, turmeric latte, yoga, all of these are manifestations. It starts with our minds. Do we believe in our soft power? And you mentioned our cultural texts. I did a show recently where we talked about how Kautilya wrote what he wrote hundreds of years before Machiavelli. But Machiavelli is believed to be the authority on how to run on statecraft. Similarly, Iliad and Odyssey, and they're much smaller than the Ramayana or Mahabharata. Ashwin, you've delved into our texts and you've tried to make them cool and accessible for the younger generation. What made you do something like that? And when you started out, did you think that you are doing something to foster India's soft power?
Palki, first of all, thank you. It's lovely to be in conversation with you, and so wonderful to see my old friend Anuraag on this panel. I must tell you, I never started out with the idea that this was going to be in any way bolstering soft power, as it were. Frankly, I didn't even know what soft power was. In fact, when you invited me for this panel, I went Googling to figure out what the hell is soft power. And I'm told that there was a Harvard professor by the name of Joseph Nye who defined soft power apparently as the ability to be able to obtain preferred outcomes through attraction rather than coercion. And I found that rather interesting because the major characteristics there are really, number one, culture, when it is pleasing to others. Number two, values, when they are attractive and consistently practiced. And most importantly, policies, when they are seen as inclusive and legitimate. And that's when you suddenly reach that point where you suddenly find that you have a certain amount of attractiveness to the rest of the world. But, honestly speaking, Palki, you mentioned Kautilya briefly, but 2,300 years ago, it was precisely what Chanakya was advocating. I mean, he outlined the strategy of Sam, Dan, Bhed, and Dand. And he advised that the very first method applied should be of Sam, gentle persuasion, praise, getting people on your side through sweet words. And only if that doesn't work, then you move on to the next step, which is Dan. And then, of course, move on to Bhed. The last part of the strategy is military power or coercion. But I must slightly differ with Anuraag in terms of hard power versus soft power. frankly, it is a little disappointing to see that India is absent from that so-called soft power 30. We make it nowhere in that list of countries. And which means, in other words, that despite our rich culture, our heritage, and all of that, we still have not been able to market it effectively. And in some ways, when I look at that list, I find that the top of the list is dominated by France, UK, Germany, the US, Switzerland, all the usual suspects who occupy the top spots. And when I think about this, there are so many countries which offer you remarkable cultural, historical potential. For example, the tourist potential of, let's say, Kenya and its animal safaris, or the historical wonders of Peru, or the history of the Central Asian republics which constituted the Silk Road. They are no less amazing than the history and culture of India. But none of them figure into that so-called soft power 30. My reading is that you need to have a certain element of economic power and or military power in order for soft power to work. And in that sense, I believe that what you need now in today's day and age is not either hard power or soft power. What you need is smart power, which is a combination of both.
Right. You spoke about marketing and you spoke about culture, and we have a marketing whiz who's now doubling up as a diplomat and has finally joined us, one and only Amish Tripathi. I'll direct that question to him. But you mentioned Joseph Nye and Kautilya. And I think this is the same example as Machiavelli and Kautilya also, that while we may have not used the term soft power in the past, we have enough and more proof that people who rule this subcontinent did employ soft power. I can give you another example from Niti Sar, if I'm not wrong, which talks about 3 types of Shaktis. It's Mantra Shakti, Prabhav Shakti, and Utsaha Shakti. And
Absolutely.
soft power is very much part of that. So we did not probably market our idea of soft power, but we, I think, always believed in it. And Amish, welcome to the conversation. We were talking about what is soft power and if we are doing enough to wield ours.
Palki, first of all, apologies to you and apologies to everyone. I got the time difference a little messed up in my
Amish,
schedule.
tumko maar padegi. You are always a late Latif.
Oh, shut up! I'm never late. I'm never late. But this time I'm my sincere apologies. But getting back to the discussion quickly. Palki, I think, if one steps back, I think the key problem is that actually we have not understood and analyzed our own history, because essentially you build your brand and your soft power basis the reality of your country, right? Before we explain ourselves to others, we need to understand ourselves, first of all. The narrative that we have of ourselves to ourselves is often erroneous, and this impacts the way we communicate our soft power or our narrative to others. I completely agree with Ashwin that, look, without hard power, there is, it's all just hot air. You need hard power to build soft power, but hard power may be a necessary function. It is not necessarily a sufficient function. There are countries which have developed hard power, but have not converted it into soft power. And you'll find that those kind of powers aren't as effective as in getting their way as compared to a country which has both hard power and soft power. There was a time when India did, actually. We ourselves don't understand that we are the only pre-Bronze Age culture that is still alive. We see ourselves as a nation that has lost repeatedly over the last 1,000 years. I think that's a wrong narrative of it. The story of the last 1,000 years is not a series of unremitting defeats. It's a story of heroic resistance. We're the only ones who are still alive. Every other pre-Bronze Age culture surrendered in the last 2,000 years. We kept fighting, our ancestors, they kept fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. The result of that is we are still here. We are not the weakest. We're actually among the toughest buggers around. That's the way we should see ourselves. How do we see ourselves historically when we were at our greatest, right? The period from the Mauryan age to the 6th, 7th, 8th century was actually our peak. There was a time when more than half the world followed the Indian way of life. Southeast Asia was largely Hinduized. Central Asia, Eastern Asia, China, Japan, we didn't send armies there. But they took on Indian names, Indian ways of life. So we had the ability to project soft power at a relatively minimal cost, because we didn't send huge armies out there. Maintaining a large armies is difficult. So therefore, I think what we need to do is, one, analyze clearly what was it that created that magic millennium and a half, when our ancestors truly influenced most of the world, right? And our influence went up to Rome as well. Among the most popular religions among the military elite in Rome in post Vespasian was actually Mithraism, which has its roots in Vedic Hinduism. So we need to understand what was it about us that we were, our ancestors, that we were so great in both hard power and soft power in those days. We need to also have an honest analysis of the last 1,000 years, that yes, we did survive, but we lost a lot. So we need to have an honest analysis of the last 1,000 years. Where did we go wrong, so that we learn from it? Did we do enough Purva Paksha, for example? Did we truly understand the invaders who were attacking us? Thirdly, and I always believe this, do not hate your enemies, learn from them, especially if they were successful. There is no denying that in the last millennium, in the last half of the last millennium, from 1500 onwards, Western culture has been more successful than any. In fact, the rest of us combined. We can, of course, hate their barbarism, but we must learn from their capabilities, what they got right. There is a tendency in our, in our things, in our culture in the modern day, in some parts of our society, to take our hatred for those who attacked us to such an extreme that we refuse to learn from them. There are things we could learn from them too. Not so much from the Turks, the Turkic invaders. I don't think they had much to teach, but, and they were just about, they were just very good at killing. They really had no other skills. But the Western culture, there is actually a lot to learn from. So I would suggest these three things. Then we can actually build a good soft power strategy. But all this is, of course, dependent on hard power. If you don't have economic and military strength, soft power means nothing.
Right. So I think we all agree that history has a huge role to play, and our own understanding of history. But I wouldn't go back 1,000 years. I would, even if you look at the past 70 years, why is it that while we have made long strides in a lot of fields, we are shy of acknowledging our achievements? And I was having a conversation at the Harvard University yesterday, and we again ended up talking about soft power. And I said that one of the examples that I could give you is that if an Indian child is selected for a NASA program, it makes front page headlines. But if an Indian child is selected for an ISRO program, he or she will probably make it to the school notice board and not beyond that. So why is it that an average person on the street knows NASA, but while Russians are pioneers, while Chinese are doing so well, they probably don't even know how to name the space agency of these countries? And where did that come from? And that is my second point. Amish, I'll come to you. On Bollywood. Bollywood has made NASA a household name. Bollywood has put the American army on a moral high ground and said, Hollywood, I'm sorry, and they go to all of these countries and they fight and they bring democracy, and all of that narrative building is happening. While our film industry is also very popular, we are only entertaining and not wielding influence. Why aren't we changing that?
Sorry, is that for me?
You respond, but we can start with that.
Okay, yeah. So in a simple term, elite culture. The elite culture of the last 70 years was highly westernized. In fact, and I'm not belittling them. Everyone has a right to choose their mother culture. But the elite culture really saw itself as, in some ways, inheritors of the British Raj, civilizing a heathen land. And that reflected in the way they approached anything about India. Our laws, our governance structures are extremely paternalistic, that we have to reform, there's nothing, intuitive in our own cultures, which could be useful, for example. It reflects in our education, it reflects in our architecture, it reflects everywhere. And see our architecture, for example, the buildings. Our architects build buildings which are appropriate for Western Europe. Western Europe, there's a shortage of the sun. A glass wall building makes sense out here because you reduce heating bills and you increase light. But in India, you don't have a problem of the shortage of the sun. You have a problem of the excess of the sun. And when you build a glass wall building, you're essentially building a giant microwave oven. And therefore, you have to blast AC from the inside. Now, what is the mindset of elite architects which makes them think that a glass wall building makes sense in India? Because the mindset is completely European and Westernized. That reflects, in the way our an elite culture cascades down. The real India is probably rising right now. Many from the real India have learnt English, so we can communicate with the old elite and start impacting narratives. The change will happen when elite culture actually gets connected to the real India. I don't think it was there earlier, frankly.
Right. Anurag, I want you to address this Bollywood question and take it a step forward. Do you think that the government should actively probably invest in mass media to help build that narrative and achieve soft power? For instance, the South Koreans took K-pop to the United Nations Security Council. What's stopping us?
Well, you see, South Asia, the South Koreans took K-pop to the United Nations after YG, a private entity, achieved what it did with Blackpink and the other bands. But I'm just addressing a point you made slightly earlier, because I think I'll differ with the panel a little bit, or maybe we'll find that we agree. You see, go back to any of your friends that have lived through trauma or lived through brutality. It could be a bad marriage, it could be an abusive parent, it could be a teacher that beats you, it could be a narcissist boss at work, whatever. It takes a while after that relationship ends for people to find out their true self-worth. Now, India and Indians have gone through multiple centuries of brutality and then colonialism. So first it was invaders from the Middle East, then a whole bunch of Europeans, etc., etc. So we must recognize that we're just coming out of collective PTSD, right? We have, we've spent 70 years dealing with the post-traumatic stress disorder that was forced on us after, of course, the glorious era that Amish talks about. Now, we're dealing with a diminished sense of worth. We're dealing with falling confidence and all of that, right? Now, India's had to deal with existential issues, food, healthcare, education, law and order. It's only now that we've developed the ability and the self-confidence to say, we will find, we will stake our claim. And soft power is an element of doing that. I mean, look, I use my own example here. My father used to work in a steel mill. After saving up for the longest time, he could afford himself a green color Lambretta, which I still remember. And usi se kaam chalta tha. Now, my father is a first generation literate, as an example. Today, as a second generation literate, a slightly more educated, self-confident, successful guy, I can think of serving a higher order need. So I don't hold India or Indians back. Of course, we could have, 70 years were a disaster for more than one reason. But I don't lament the fact that we took so long to get out of, the post-traumatic stress as we did. And I'm going to use a small example because Ashwin is here on the call, and unlike the other busy gentlemen, Ashwin did land up on time. But jokes apart, apologies, Amish. But You see, I'll take the simple idea, right? बचपन से हम लोग
I'm
सुनते
assuming-
आ रहे हैं कि
I'm assuming my gesture didn't come up publicly.
It did for a fleeting second.
नहीं यार, but seriously, I tell you, बचपन से हम लोग सुनते आ रहे हैं कि समय जो है, it has no beginning, it has no end. Time is shapeless, boundless, infinite, etc., etc. Right? Now people have started articulating the idea that time as a linear concept is a Western imposition. But then you look at the cutting edge of science. You look at Stephen Hawking and Neil deGrasse Tyson and Stephen Cox and all of that. They're all talking about time as moving fast and slow, multidirectional, etc., etc. Right? You have movies like Interstellar and Marvel and Multiverse exploring the idea that time could be moving at different paces based on context. I mean, you spend an hour with your children and it seems like a minute. You spend a minute with your in-laws and it seems like infinity. But the fundamental idea of time not being simple linear is now being explored, and it's an idea that we've heard as children, right? And I'm going to pitch Ashwin's book here. Strongly recommend you guys to read this, right? It took Ashwin to write Keepers of the Kalchakra to talk about or to make the whole idea of time as non-linear as an edible, digestible concept. And I think we need more of these things happening. Now, I genuinely believe that an Ashwin, right, or authors like, a whole bunch of new age authors as we have them today, could not have existed a generation or two back, because we were dealing contextually, human beings were dealing with a very different kind of a set of challenges there. What Amish does today, right, would not have been relevant either to an audience, nor to an author to say, look, let me write about Shiva and Sita and all of that in a new language. We could not have. I mean, if you look at the cover of Amish's book, Sita as a warrior is a relatively new concept for the mass market, and I think we need more of that happening. So I don't I don't suffer much about should we have started now or 20 years back or 70 years back. I'm happy that we have, and I'm happy that today when you have, let's say Dr. Andrew Huberman as an example, who teaches at Stanford and is the cutting edge of neurosciences. When you talk of NSDR today, right, non-sleep deep relaxation, he actually credits Yoga Nidra as the source of that. And all of that could have happened only now. You needed multiple factors, technology, transparency, communication, intermingling. You needed many things to happen for India to be able to claim its space in the sun. And I'm glad it's happening now. Yeah? I mean, yeah, sorry, I've just been blabbering, but a bunch of thoughts here.
That's my question, but I'll throw a few thoughts in the mix, and I will tell you where I disagree with you guys on some points. One is that yes, history is to blame, and we've suffered so much for 1,000 years, but it's history. Can we wallow in history, or should we look at the present? Should we still look for someone else to blame, or should we introspect and say, okay, guys, we're here right now, and we've been an independent country for 70 years, and we can't keep blaming external factors. But what have we done? What are the steps that we have taken to harness our soft power? That is point number one. Point number two is about, you said post-traumatic stress disorder. I'll give you the example of China, for instance. Not very often that I come out praising them, but they came up with 100 years of humiliation, and they made it their mission, a national mission to overcome that. And look how far they've come. Whatever means, they've had some massive setbacks and the people have suffered, but they have grown. So I think that at some level of the country, we need to step out of this, so much happened to us, and so we're not being able to go. I know I've probably answered all of you, but I want you to answer them.
Sorry, 10-second interjection. Just a very small, before you come.
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned China, Palki. Now, Joseph Nye, the gentleman who coined the term, said that democracy is a necessary precondition to soft power. And so let's not forget, China might be able to achieve whatever it is today largely by way of force. But force as just like with human beings, right? Force as a way of influencing behavior has a very limited shelf life. It doesn't outlast. I can see why.
But every country is always going to have unique circumstances. We cannot be China, we cannot be America, we cannot be Singapore, we cannot be Japan. We will remain India. As India, can we find solutions in our unique situation is my question. Amish.
Yeah, if I may just build a bit on what Anurag, and someone who came late, wants to do increased class participation at this point of time. So, building a bit on what Anurag said, and Palki, you as well, for a country which has a 10,000-year history, 70 years is not that long, right? And let's not belittle all our, initial founding fathers. We got many things right as well. We could have done many things better, but we got many things right as well. But the core issue of the stress of the last 1,000 years, the trauma of the last 1,000 years, why is it important to address? You build a future basis your impression of yourself. There's a reason why Western European culture, which was largely actually what would be called the barbarian cultures during the Roman era, Germanic, Dutch, UK, Western Europe is actually primarily that. The Mediterranean world is not really a part of it. They incorporated Greco-Roman culture as their ancestors, which is actually technically wrong. They were a different religion, different racial group. Why did they do that? Because actually they had no history to fall back on. What was the history that they could speak of, right? You need, this thing that pride comes before a fall is only half the story, because you cannot fall if you haven't risen in the first place, right? So pride is important because it gives you the fuel to rise. Excess pride is a problem, right? We need to find some story, some resolution to the trauma of the last 1,000 years. And Anurag spoke very rightly, and individuals have trauma as well, abuse as children or anything else. And at times you'll find psychologists will tell you individuals can swing to two extremes, either denial or unfocused hatred. And any psychologist will tell you both those strategies aren't a good idea, right? The 100 years of humiliation of China is actually unfocused hatred. What you see in the Arab world, because the same Turks, Anurag, it's not Middle Easterners who invaded us, by the way. They were Turks from Central Asia. Arabs didn't really come here. So they were Turks from Central Asia. Now, the same Turks who invaded us invaded the Arab world as well. And in Arab world, again, you see unfocused hatred, which is not good, right? Our strategy was denialism. When you spoke of Bollywood, this thing of showing the Temurids as, or the Delhi Sultans as Indians speaking Urdu. Alauddin Khilji did not look like Ranveer Singh. Akbar did not look like Prithviraj Kapoor. To us, they would have looked Chinese. They're from Central Asia. They did not speak Urdu. Urdu is our language, right? They would have spoken Turkic or Persian. We would have understood anything of what they were saying. This is actually classic denial strategy. यार हमारे साथ तो कुछ हुआ ही नहीं. ये तो हमारे ही लोग थे. ये तो उर्दू बात कर रहे थे. ये तो गजल शायरी कर रहे थे. Correct. That is not a wise strategy either. China, by the way, has used that strategy too. Not in the 100 years of European rule, but in the Mongol rule. The Yuans were Mongols. They were foreigners. The Georgians were Manchus. They were foreigners. The kings were Manchus. Again, they were foreigners. So of the last 1,000 years, at least 800 years, Han Chinese have been ruled by foreigners. They just said the invaders are us. Classic denialism. That's actually what we did as well. We have to find some way to make peace with what happened in the last 1,000 years, because that will remove the poison that is a source of dissonance in modern Indian society. It's one of the things I try and address in some articles, some books like Suhail Dev. How do we make peace with it? Because those guys were barbaric, there's no doubt about it, but they were foreigners. They have nothing to do with Indian Muslims, right? And we can see a sense of pride in ourselves that we are the only ones who survived. Everyone else surrendered.
Yeah, how do we thrive? Where do we go from here is my question. And
you make peace with it, then you can start building. Make peace with it, then you can. That's the point I'm trying to make. Make peace with it. Yes, Americans have made peace with British colonialism, right? Because they kick them out. They see themselves as great warriors. So it doesn't impact them anymore. Sorry, Ashwin.
No.
Amish, I was wanting to actually jump in from that line which sort of Palki used, which is where do we really go from here? So I understand and I appreciate what both you and Anurag have said, but for a minute, I honestly, I believe that most of what we have achieved as India in the space of soft power has been actually without government in that sense, because if you think about it, chicken tikka masala became almost like a global food icon without the government having done anything in order to make it so. Or, for example, Air India under JRD Tata promoted the magical nature of India well before there was any concept of a magical India. Bollywood not only unites the so-called diaspora, but is widely watched by foreign audiences. You just see the success of, let's say, Amir Khan films in China, or the fan following of Bollywood in places like Iran, Armenia, Turkey, Russia, Malaysia, Egypt. And it's quite remarkable. And all of this was achieved without government, Palki. I mean, yoga was already flourishing across gyms and spas and fitness centers in the West well before the Modi government stepped in order to give it a further push. So, you know, I mean, think about this. A simple act of Ravi Shankar attending the Woodstock Festival in 1969 made Indian classical music and the sitar into almost a household term. But that is not to say that the government cannot do lots. There's tons that we can actually do. For example, I believe that our biggest strength lies in the spiritual domain. Buddhism emerged from India, but today it is treated much more as a Chinese or Japanese or Korean product, a philosophy, a system, because we never really built on the Buddhist origin story. We did not tell that story properly. The Buddhist circuit, including places like, for example, Bodh Gaya, Nalanda, Rajgir, Kaushambi, Kapilavastu, all of these places, I mean, I'm given to understand that now there is some work in terms of trying to promote this circuit. But think of the power of Hajj in Mecca, or think of the power of Kumbh in Prayag. Spiritual power cannot be discounted, and I think we need to be building on that. For example, you have such a large number of foreigners who are part of ISKCON. Why are we not doing more in order to promote tourism to Krishna-related spots like Vrindavan, Mathura, Dwarka? Another thing that really bugs me is the fact that we are not working on our patent regime at all. In the world of innovation, we have such an old reputation and we have so many discoveries. But when it, I mean, I'm given to understand that there was something like around 6 lakh patents filed in the US annually and about twice of that number in China. It really is depressing when I think that in India we file about 40 to 50,000 patents a year, and only about 10 or 12,000 of them get approved. And that's what makes it possible for things like haldi and turmeric to get sort of appropriated, or at least try to get appropriated by the West. I worry when Sanskrit, for example, which is the very key to our ancient knowledge and wisdom, can be appropriated by countries like Germany, which have far more chairs in Sanskrit than the JNU. Amish is here on this program. The so-called Indian cultural centers established by the ICCR, their numbers are not commensurate with the number, with the size and weight of India. Amish, correct me if I am wrong, but one of the most important markets is the US. I mean, you are running Touchwood, the Nehru Center in London, and you've done a phenomenal job in terms of revitalizing it. But what about the US, which is considered to be almost like the fulcrum of Western thought in some ways? I don't think we have a ICCR presence out there. International, Palki, I'm so glad that you're the one who is, moderating this interview, because till date, we did not have the equivalent of a BBC or an Al Jazeera. We are now seeing the makings of one in a WION. So to my mind, it has to be a combined effort of both the private players as well as government in terms of being able to figure out, okay, what are the few things that we really need to push in order to be able to achieve that. But I still hold to my original theory that without hard power, without economic might, you can't make this happen.
Yes, and economic might, and I will add one more thing to your mix. You mentioned cultural soft power, you mentioned media, you mentioned all of those things. Every young person in the world wants to sport Nike shoes and carry an Apple iPhone, right? We don't have such brands, and that too contributes to the soft power or lack of it that India can exert. I've been told we have to wrap in 5 minutes, so I'm going to give 30 seconds to you. I know that's not the right math, but I'm not sure anyone will finish in 30 seconds. So we'll start with Anuraag.
Yeah, I'm just going to answer your question about, so where do we go from here, Palki? Quick personal anecdote. A few years back, I was subject to a fairly vicious slander campaign. Ki Anuraag aisa hai, Anuraag waisa hai, and a whole bunch of things. Now, sadly, this was coming from people who I thought were very close to me. So at one level, you feel sad. At another level, like Amish was doing, you start psychoanalyzing them. Ki yaar, why are they projecting their insecurity on me? Why so much envy, blah, blah, blah. But then after worrying about it for a short while, ki yaar, why is there such a need to gossip or to slander, to blame, to defame? Then I said, yaar, iska resolution kahan pe hai? And the resolution was very simple. Whoever we knew in common who brought this to me, yaar, so-and-so was saying this about you. I said, okay, let them say whatever they are. I have nothing against them. You make your opinion of me based on your experience of me. You and I have interacted, right? Let that be the only source of what you think about me. And suddenly, within a 10-minute conversation, all the slander disappeared from their minds. Now, I think that is what India needs to focus on. There is a lot of slander and misperception about India that is spread because of the way movies are made, because of Western media and what have you. Right? People can watch a Salam Bombay and a Slumdog Millionaire and say India is a filthy place. But when they come to our homes, they see कि यार हम लोग जूते बाहर उतारते हैं, and that changes something in people's minds. Right? People talk about only 4% of our people, 5% of our people are vaccinated, but data reveals one of the efforts that I am involved with. We put out a very simple graph that says, okay, here's the vaccination capacity by country. How many are we vaccinating every day? And the whole conversation on COVID numbers changed drastically. Right? So I think it's very important for people outside of India to get to experience India and Indianness directly. B, there's a lot of experiencing that is already happening without connecting it to the source, which is India. Now, sadly, we were an open source culture, so to speak. And we kind of
because we have to wrap.
Yeah, 10 seconds. Yeah, so I think we need to start tagging things that people consume, spirituality, deep breathing, ko aaj vagus nerve exercises aap bol rahe ho, good stuff. But we need to build a bit of a campaign around that. Third, exactly as Ashwin said, we do need a public-private partnership where wherever there is money in it, let private organizations run with it. Wherever there is not, I do believe that the state, like Russia used to have a Sputnik magazine, right? Like America has PAN. It's surprising India doesn't. But there might be small areas where the state might need to build capacity. But otherwise, private players have been great at it so far.
Amish?
There are top-down cultures and there are bottom-up cultures. Right? China is a top-down culture and has been for a long time. India was always a bottom-up culture. There are some things that only the government can do and they should do. Building our hard power, security, regulating the economy, only they can do. Our soft power, yes, the government can support in some ways. But largely it's up to us. There are 1.3 billion of us. Right? If we rediscover our culture, if we speak, how did our soft power, and which is why I keep saying we need to analyze what our ancestors got right. How did it build in that magic millennium? It's because Indian individuals went out and spoke our culture, evangelized it, and they themselves were such great exemplars, such great ambassadors of that culture, that people got attracted to us. We didn't force our way on others. We attracted them to our side. That's a very, very different approach, and that comes only from a bottom-up approach. So my thing is this, that I am actually quite sanguine about it, because think about the kind of things we could have spoken of 30 years ago and what we are speaking of today. Think of how much the needle has moved. Think of how much more of our own culture is being mined and rediscovered, things which we had forgotten. Think of how many people fight back the utter nonsense that was taught to us that India was never a nation and that the British created us. You know, for
Right.
many decades, we would take it quietly. Now, many of us will quote the Vishnu Puran to them and tell them to shut up. Or maybe we are Indian, so we'll be a little more polite, hopefully. Some of us will be. But the point I'm trying to make is that there are 1.3 billion of us. We are the ambassadors of our culture. And through human history, we've been at our best when we've been a bottom-up culture. Even Gautam Buddha, even Adi Shankaracharya, they were Siddha Purushas. They could have taken moksha, but they didn't just mandate their knowledge down. They went across the country step by step, convincing people, speaking to people. That is our way, bottom up. That's what every single one of us needs to do. So the responsibility is on every single one of us. We are the ones who will make Mother India a great culture once again.
Right. Ashwin, 30 seconds.
Sure. Palki, I think the panel reflects the views really. I mean, you take something like the work that, let's say, for example, Anuraag has been doing with this India Pride project. We would not have been discussing things like the India Pride project probably 20 years ago. The fact that it's so important to bring back the lost and stolen heritage. But I think fundamentally what we need to be pushing on is the dharmic values of India. You know, I mean, the fact that we embrace multiple truths, the fact that 33 million deities can be part of a similar family, that Jesus Christ can be on the facade of a temple, that, you know, the Buddha can be absorbed as a avatar of Vishnu, that you could be Astic or Nastic, Shaivite or Vaishnavite, carnivore, vegetarian, you could be a fire worshipper, a nature worshipper, an idol worshipper, and all of these are considered as valid paths to the divine. You could worship Shakti or Shiva, and both are acceptable. You may see the path to enlightenment as yantra, tantra, or mantra, and that also is okay. Palki may hold that a stone is a shivling, and I may hold that the shivling is a stone. We are both equally welcome. And that's the great thing about India, that we have, that there's something for everyone. We can have 300 versions of an epic called Ramayana, but your view does not negate mine. I think that is what we really need to push out there. And it's a complicated story to push. But at the end of the day, really talking about India's soft power is about telling a good story. And there are enough storytellers in India, so we need to tell that good story.
We have some of the best on this panel. Thank you very much for speaking. And it's always a pleasure to talk to you.